Welcome, dear listener, to another calming story here on Whispers of the Night. Tonight, I invite you to set aside your worries, loosen the weight of your day, and let yourself drift into a world of soft ticking clocks, quiet cobblestone streets, and gentle laughter carried on the breeze. But first, if you'd like to enjoy more bedtime journeys like this, make sure to subscribe to Whispers of the Night. Your support helps us bring more stories of comfort and rest, night after night. Story this evening is called The Pocket Watch of Forgotten Laughter. It follows the journey of a kind-hearted girl named Nora, who discovers a mysterious watch in a clockmaker's shop. A watch that doesn't measure hours or minutes, but something far more precious. Joy. As the night deepens, this story will guide you gently into slumber, reminding you of warmth, wonder, and the healing power of memory. So settle into your bed, find a comfortable position, and allow your body to soften, knowing you are safe and cared for here. Let your breath grow slower, like the rhythm of a clock, steady, calm, and reassuring. With each tick, each inhale, and exhale, you'll drift further into rest. Now, let us begin. Before we step into the heart of the story, take this moment to rest. Close your eyes gently if they are not already closed, and notice the rhythm of your breathing. Inhale slowly, as though drawing in the soft glow of lantern light, and exhale, as though releasing any heaviness from the day. Feel your shoulders sink deeper into the mattress, as though gravity is taking tender care of you. Let your arms rest softly at your sides, loose and unburdened. Imagine each breath like a gentle wave lapping against the shore, steady and comforting. Picture yourself walking down a quiet village lane. The cobblestones are cool beneath your feet, and lanterns sway gently, casting circles of golden light that guide your way. The night air carries a hint of wood smoke, and somewhere nearby, a clock chimes softly, not to mark the hour, but simply to soothe. With every step, you feel lighter. You pass windows glowing with warmth, each one holding a story, a memory, a fragment of laughter. The world feels safe here. The night is kind. Now imagine you hold the little silver watch in your hand. It glows gently, like a star resting in your palm. And when you open it, you don't hear ticking, but a soft echo of laughter, pure, joyful, timeless. That laughter drifts into the air, wrapping around you like a blanket of comfort. Allow this feeling to settle deep into you. With every breath, let your mind loosen. With every exhale, let the day slip away. The night is yours now, calm and endless, ready to carry you into dreams. The Pocket Watch of Forgotten Laughter. The Clockmaker's Gift. The crooked street was easy to miss. Most people hurried past, their eyes set on the wider road lined with bakeries, cloth sellers, and a bustling fountain at the square's heart. Yet, if one turned their head just slightly, they might notice it a narrow lane pressed between leaning houses, the stones beneath one's feet polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. The crooked street bent like a question mark, curious and secretive, as though it held its breath and waited only for those who wandered without haste. Nora was one of those wanderers. She had always preferred quiet corners to crowded markets, and she walked with a kind of listening heart. That day, the air was thick with the scent of rain, though no droplets had yet fallen. She followed the crooked street without deciding to, as if the cobblestones had drawn her onward with invisible threads. Halfway down the lane, where the houses leaned so close they seemed almost to touch foreheads, Nora found it, a shop with tall windows clouded by age and dust. Painted in faded gold letters across the signboard was a single word: clockmaker. She paused. The window was crowded with clocks of every shape and kind. Tall pendulum clocks with carved wooden bodies stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces solemn and dignified. Tiny carriage clocks sat like mischievous children beside them, each ticking at its own impatient pace. A row of cuckoo clocks perched higher still, their carved birds frozen mid-song. Yet, what caught Nora's attention most were the sounds, the gentle, overlapping chorus of ticks, tonks, and soft chimes, weaving a strange, comforting music that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the world. Nora pressed her hand against the glass. The pane was cool, but beneath it she felt warmed sensation, as though time itself hummed behind the walls. After a moment's hesitation, she pushed the door open. A little brass bell tinkled above her head. Inside, the shop smelled of wood shavings, oil, and something faintly metallic, like silver coins warmed in the sun. The light filtering through the tall windows was dim, softened by dust, yet it gleamed on the brass and glass faces of clocks, making them glow faintly, like stars caught indoors. At the counter stood an old man with round spectacles balanced on his nose. His hair was white as frost, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes still carried a spark, bright as a candle in a winter window. He looked up when Nora entered and smiled, as though he had been waiting for her. "Good afternoon, child," he said. His voice was slow and warm, carrying the patience of someone used to listening to ticking clocks for hours on end. Come in, come in. Time is always kinder when shared." Nora smiled shyly and stepped forward. She did not quite know why she had come inside. Perhaps it was the music of the clocks, or perhaps it was curiosity. But already she felt she had stumbled into something that mattered. The shop was crowded, almost maze-like, with narrow paths winding between shelves and tables. Everywhere she looked, gears and springs winked in the half-light. Polished tools lay neatly arranged, and little drawers held secrets in the form of screws, pins, and wheels no larger than a button. Some clocks ticked in steady rhythm, others chattered in quick beats, and still others chimed faintly as if conversing with one another. "Would you like to see something special?" the clockmaker asked, noticing the way Nora's eyes darted from one clock to another. "Yes, please," she replied softly. The old man nodded, then reached under the counter. When he lifted his hand again, something small and silver gleamed in his palm. He set it down gently before her, a pocket watch, no bigger than a plum, its casing etched with delicate swirls that caught the light like ripples on water. The silver was not polished to perfection. Instead, it carried a softness, a glow that seemed earned by years of being held. "This one," the clockmaker said, "is unlike the others." Nora leaned closer. The watch's glass face reflected her wide eyes. But beyond the glass, the hands were still, frozen at a curious angle. She touched the edge of the watch lightly, as though it might vanish if handled too firmly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The clockmaker nodded slowly, though his gaze seemed far away. "It once belonged to a child," he said, "a boy who laughed often, laughed so brightly that his joy seemed to live in every corner of this shop. That laughter kept the watch ticking, you see. But time has its way of stealing what we do not guard, and one day the laughter was gone. The watch has been silent ever since." Nora looked at him, puzzled. "How can laughter keep a watch alive?" The old man's eyes twinkled behind his spectacles. "Ah, but not all clocks run on gears and springs, child. Some keep time with something far rarer, with memories, with feelings, with the echoes of things too precious to lose." This watch held laughter. When the laughter faded, so did its ticking. For a moment, the shop was quiet, except for the layered ticking of the other clocks. Nora thought of laughter, how it bubbled out of children like a spring, how it sometimes echoed even after the sound was gone. She thought, too, of the way silence could creep in when joy disappeared. She wondered who the child had been and why his laughter had been lost. The clockmaker studied her with quiet kindness. "Would you like to take it?" he asked suddenly. "Nora, blink it, take it. Yes, a gift, if you are willing. It has sat here long enough, waiting for someone who might listen to what it still carries. Perhaps it is meant for you." Nora hesitated. The idea of accepting such a treasure from a stranger seemed strange. Yet the watch seemed to hum faintly beneath her fingers, as if it recognized her touch. She thought of the way the crooked street had led her here, and of how the watch had caught her eye among so many others. "Why me?" she asked softly. The clockmaker leaned closer, his eyes twinkling like candlelight. "Because you hear the quiet things. I saw it the moment you walked in. You listen, even when no one speaks. That is a gift rarer than you know. The watch may teach you something yet." Nora's heart gave a small, uncertain flutter. She closed her fingers gently around the silver watch. The metal was cool, yet beneath it there was a pulse, faint as a distant drumbeat, waiting. "Thank you," she whispered. The old man smiled, but his gaze lingered on the watch as though remembering something only he could see. "Take care of it, and take care of the laughter you carry within you. Time is always watching." When Nora left the shop, the crooked street seemed different, quieter, as though it had given her its secret and now watched to see what she would do with it. The silver watch weighed lightly in her pocket, and yet it felt heavy with mystery. At home, she sat on her small wooden bed, the evening light fading into amber at the window. She held the pocket watch in her hands and studied it once more. Though its hands were still, she thought she heard, just barely, the ghost of a sound. Not a tick, not a chime, but something softer, like the faint echo of a laugh, carried far on the wind. Nora smiled without realizing it. For the first time in a long while, her little room seemed warmer, as though the watch had carried something of the clockmaker's shop into her world. She did not know what it meant yet, but she would find out. For now, she tucked the watch under her pillow, closed her eyes, and drifted into dreams where laughter, soft and silver, seemed to linger in the air. Echoes of laughter. Night came quietly, the way it often did in Nora's small village. The crooked street outside had settled into stillness, its stones cooling under the soft breath of moonlight. Windows glowed faintly here and there, lanterns swaying in the evening breeze. Beyond, the hills slept beneath a silver sky scattered with stars. Nora lay in her little room at the top of her family's house, the rafters above creaking gently as the night air moved through them. The silver pocket watch rested on the table beside her bed. All through supper, she had felt its weight in her pocket, as though it wanted to remind her it was still there, waiting. She had told no one about it. Something about the gift felt private, like a secret whispered only to her. Her mother had kissed her forehead goodnight. Her father had hummed his usual tune before bed, and then all was quiet except for the rustle of leaves outside her window. Nora sat upright now, moonlight spilling across her quilt, and picked up the watch. It was cool against her palm, though it warmed quickly at her touch. She turned it over, tracing the delicate swirls etched into the silver casing. In the quiet of the night, the other clocks in the house ticked faintly through the wall, steady, familiar beats marking the ordinary passage of time. But the silver pocket watch remained still, its hands frozen, its face waiting. Nora hesitated, then pressed the tiny latch and opened it. For a moment, she expected silence, but instead, from within the watch came a sound so soft, so unexpected. It was the giggle of a child, bright, bubbling, full of warmth, and, though it faded almost as soon as it appeared, it left behind a shimmer in the air, as though the room itself had smiled. Nora gasped quietly, her eyes widening around the room, but nothing had changed. The rafters were still, the curtains swayed gently in the open window, and the moonlight lay quietly across the floor. Yet she knew she had not imagined it. The sound had come from the watch. She leaned closer and listened again. A heartbeat passed, then another, and then, soft as a whisper, the giggle returned, curve into a smile she hadn't meant to wear. She did not know why the sound filled her with warmth, but it did. It was as if some forgotten joy had been placed into her hands. Laughter faded again, leaving the watch silent. Yet Nora still felt it, like the memory of a hug long after the arms had let go. She closed her eyes and let the feeling wash through her. When she opened them, she studied the watch anew. Its hands had not moved. Midnight and morning, noon and dusk, none of it seemed to matter here. The thought aloud, "You don't keep hours, you keep laughter." The words felt true the moment she said them. Nora lay back against her pillow, the watch resting on her chest. She listened, waiting, and after a long silence, the soft giggle came again. Each time it did, she felt a little spark kindle in her heart, a spark she hadn't realized she needed. For Nora, laughter was not something that filled her house often. Her parents were kind, But they worked hard, and life in the village was not always easy. Days were long, chores were many, and though love lived in their home, joy sometimes felt like a luxury, something fleeting, like the warmth of summer on a winter's day. But now, with the watch in her hands, laughter returned to her room again, and again, faint but steady, like a candle flame refusing to go out. She began to imagine the boy the clockmaker had spoken of, the child whose laughter had once kept the watch alive. Who was he? Did he run through fields with grass brushing his ankles, laughing as the wind tugged his hair? Did he chase after butterflies, stumble, fall, and laugh again at his own clumsiness? Nora tried to picture his face, but it was always blurry, like a memory too far away to catch. Still, the laughter carried his spirit, and it filled her with a warmth that reached deeper than words. After a while, Nora closed the watch and held it against her cheek. She whispered softly, "Thank you," though she wasn't sure who she was, thanking the clockmaker, the child, or the watch itself. Perhaps all three. The moon drifted higher in the sky, and as her eyes fluttered shut, the echoes of laughter wove through her dreams. Her dream began in a meadow. She stood in tall grass, the sky above painted in soft twilight colors, lavender fading into rose, rose melting into deep blue. Fireflies floated like tiny lanterns, blinking on and off. The air was sweet with the scent of clover, and somewhere nearby a brook murmured gently over stones. Then she heard it, laughter. It rang out clearly now, not faint like before. Nora turned, searching dot in the meadow ahead. She saw a figure darting through the grass, a boy, no older than herself, perhaps a little younger. His hair shone golden in the twilight, his clothes simple, his bare feet flashing as he ran. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes bright with mischief, and laughed again. The boy waved, then darted away, his laughter trailing behind him like music. She chased after him. The grass brushed her knees, the fireflies scattered, and the meadow seemed endless. No matter how quickly she ran, the boy stayed just ahead, always near but never close enough to reach. His laughter guided her, pulling her forward, until she felt both breathless and full of joy at last. The boy stopped at the edge of a grove of trees. He turned toward her, his face half hidden in the shadows. He held something in his hands, a silver watch, glowing faintly in the twilight. Nora froze. Her own watch lay heavy in her pocket, yet here he was, holding another. He smiled, a smile so bright it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Don't forget," he whispered, though his voice sounded like a ripple in the air, thin and far away. "Forget what?" The meadow fading into mist. The boy's figure blurred, his laughter echoing one last time before vanishing into silence. Nora woke with a start. Morning light streamed through her window, soft and golden. Up slowly, her heart beating with the lingering pulse of the dream. She remembered the meadow, the boy, his voice saying, "Don't forget." Forget what? She held the silver watch in her palm. It was closed now, but when she opened it again, faint giggles spilled out like a secret. They were softer than in her dream, yet still enough to make her lips curve into a smile. This time, she laughed too quietly at first, then more freely, until her own laughter joined the echoing giggles, weaving together like two melodies in harmony. It felt strange and wonderful, as though the watch had reminded her how to laugh again, not politely or briefly, but truly, with her whole heart. Her laughter filled the little room, bouncing off the walls, bright and alive. And for a moment, Nora thought she heard the watch tick faintly in replies just once. Like a heartbeat, she gasped, holding it closer. "You're waking up," she whispered. The thought thrilled her. Perhaps laughter could bring the watch to life again. Perhaps the child's joy wasn't gone forever, only needed someone to listen, someone to share in it. Nora pressed the watch against her chest and smiled. She didn't yet know what journey lay ahead, but she felt certain of one thing. This was only the beginning, and somewhere, faint but steady, the echoes of laughter continued to guide her forward. The laughter returns. The morning after her dream, Nora carried the silver pocket watch with her as she stepped into the village streets. The sun was rising, warm and golden, painting the crooked rooftops in honeyed light. Shopkeepers unlatched shutters, calling greetings across the square. A cart rattled by, laden with loaves of bread still steaming from the oven. The fountain splashed gently, scattering light across cobblestones, slick from the night's dew. Nora usually passed through the square, quietly slipping from one errand to another. She was a girl of listening more than speaking, and though the village was kind, its noise often rushed past her like a river. But that morning, something felt different. The pocket watch nestled in her pocket, heavy and alive, as though waiting. Each step she took seemed to stir a faint hum inside it, like a song gathering breath before being sung. She paused beside the fountain. The stone rim was cool beneath her fingertips, and children ran circles around it, shrieking with delight. One boy tripped and tumbled, his knees scraping the ground. For a moment, silence fell. Then he laughed, brushing dust from his legs, as though falling were part of the game. The sound rang out, pure and untroubled, and from her pocket came a soft chime. Nora froze. It wasn't the usual tick of a clock, no. This was brighter, lighter, almost like the first notes of a bell carried on the wind. She pulled the watch out, holding it gently in her palm. Its face glowed faintly in the sunlight, and though its hands still lay frozen, it pulsed with sound. The boy's laughter echoed again, joined by the giggles of the children chasing him. Their joy spread like ripples across the square. Passers-by slowed, smiles tugging at their lips as they watched. Even the baker, usually stern with flour smudging his brow, chuckled under his breath. Nora's eyes widened. The chime of the watch wasn't just for her, was awakening something in others too. She walked on, the watch cradled in her hand. Near the market stalls, she saw an old woman sitting alone on a bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her face was lined with years, her eyes clouded with the distance of memories. She watched the bustle of the market without expression, as though the world had long since stopped surprising her. Nora hesitated, then sat beside her. The watch stirred again, humming softly. When Nora opened it, faint laughter spilled out, the childlike giggle she had first heard in her room. The old woman blinked, her lips parted slightly, and for a moment she seemed startled, as though someone had called her name. Then, slowly, her gaze softened. She tilted her head, as though listening to something only she could hear. I remember, she whispered at last. Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with wonder. Skipping ropes in the lane behind my mother's house, my sister and I singing silly rhymes until we tumbled in the grass from laughing too hard. Her eyes filled with tears, yet her smile was radiant. A laugh escaped her quiet, tender, but true. The sound seemed to lift the weight from her shoulders, making her look younger in an instant. Nora felt her own throat tighten. She held the watch closer, marveling at the way it drew forgotten joy out of the deepest places, like a hidden spring bubbling up after years of drought. When she rose to leave, the old woman caught her hand. "Thank you, dear," she said softly, as though Nora had returned something she hadn't known was missing. Nora smiled shyly and tucked the watch back into her pocket. All that day, wherever Nora went, she noticed the same thing. At the blacksmith's forge, a weary man paused in his hammering to grin as two apprentices stumbled into each other, laughing helplessly. The chime of the watch followed, faint but sure, at the laundry lines. Women bent over baskets of damp clothes began to hum old tunes, chuckling at forgotten verses that once made them laugh as girls. Again the watch chimed, as if in harmony. Even the shepherd at the hill's edge, usually silent as stone, broke into laughter when a lamb butted his leg and bleated indignantly. The sound startled him at first, then freed him, and he laughed again, richer, louder, until it rolled down the hillside like thunder softened by joy. With each echo, Nora felt the watch grow warmer in her hand. Its face gleamed brighter, and though the hands did not move, she sensed they were not entirely still. It was as if the watch measured not minutes, but moments of joy turning invisible gears each time laughter was born. And with every new chime, Nora's own heart lightened. She smiled without meaning to, her steps quicker, her eyes brighter. She felt herself part of something larger, as though the village itself were breathing more freely through the laughter it had forgotten. As evening drew near, the square filled with tired workers returning from fields and workshops. Their faces were weary, their shoulders bent beneath the day. Nora stood at the fountain again, the watch warm in her pocket. She wondered, would it answer now, in the hush of dusk, when spirits were low? She opened it. The faint giggle spilled out, and at first no one noticed. Then, like a spark catching tinder, small smiles began to spread. One man lifted his head, remembering a joke his brother had once told him. A woman hummed a lullaby, laughter mingling with the children tugging at her skirts. A group of boys burst into play, tossing their caps into the air as though the day's labor had never touched them. The sound grew, weaving through the square, not loud, not forced, but genuine, not chorus, of laughter rising like bells at vespers. And through it all, the watch chimed softly, steady and sure, its silver face glowing in the last light of day. Nora pressed it against her heart. She understood now. This was no ordinary gift. The watch did not mark hours and minutes. It awakened joy hidden deep within people. Joy the world had tried to bury beneath chores and worries, beneath years of silence. It was a vessel of memory, a keeper of laughter, a reminder that even in weary places, light still waited to be found. That night, when Nora returned home, she placed the watch carefully on her bedside table. The house was quiet, her parents already asleep, but the watch glowed faintly in the moonlight. She sat on the edge of her bed, thinking of the old woman on the bench, the blacksmith at his forge, the shepherd laughing with his lamb. She thought of how the sound had spread through the village like ripples in water, touching one life and then another. The watch had been silent for years, the clockmaker had said, yet in her hands it lived again. Nora smiled, a soft, private smile. She whispered into the stillness, "We'll bring it back together, you and I." When she lay down to sleep, the watch hummed faintly at her side, and in her dreams, the meadow returned fireflies, twilight, and the golden-haired boy. This time, he stood closer, his laughter ringing clear. "You're remembering," he told her, though his lips barely moved. "Keep listening." Then he laughed again, and the sound carried her gently into the depths of sleep. The weight of silence. The days that followed were filled with laughter. Everywhere Nora went, the silver pocket watch seemed to sing. Children giggled more freely. Old friends recalled stories long forgotten, and even the sternest faces softened into smiles when the watch chimed softly in her hand. It was as though joy had been waiting in every corner of the village, tucked away like hidden sunlight, and the watch had found the key to let it spill out again. Nora felt lighter, too. She laughed with the children at the fountain, hummed with the washerwomen by the stream, and smiled at jokes that once would have slipped past her unnoticed. The watch made her a part of something she had not known. She was missing a web of shared happiness, delicate and strong, binding the village together. But one morning, all was different. Nora awoke to stillness. The first thing she noticed was the absence of sound. The other clocks in the house ticked softly as always, but the silver watch lay on her bedside table, silent. Its face looked duller, the silver less bright. She lifted it quickly, heart racing, and pressed the latch. No laughter spilled out. No faint giggle, no hidden chime, only silence, heavy and unyielding. She shook it gently, held it to her ear, whispered to it as she had before, but nothing stirred. A cold unease settled in her chest. When she stepped into the village square, she noticed the difference at once. The fountain still splashed, the baker still stacked loaves, the smith still hammered his iron butt. Everything felt muted. The voices were quieter, the smiles thinner, the air itself heavy, as though wrapped in a gray veil. Children chased one another, but their play was half-hearted. Their laughter died quickly, replaced by bickering. The old woman, who had once recalled her skipping rhymes, sat stiffly on her bench, lips pressed tight. Even the shepherd at the edge of the square moved silently among his sheep, his face lined with weariness. Nora clutched the watch in her hand. It was as if the silence of the watch had bled into the village itself. Draining joy from every corner, she hurried through the streets, searching for some spark of laughter, but found none. Even the cuckoo clocks in the shop windows seemed quieter, their carved birds waiting silently behind closed doors. By midday, Nora's heart ached. She found herself standing once again outside, the crooked street where the clockmaker's shop lay hidden. The brass bell chimed faintly as she pushed open the door inside. The shop was just as it had been filled, with ticking, chiming, whispering clocks, but Nora noticed now that their chorus felt heavier, slower. It was like walking into a room full of sighs. The old clockmaker looked up from his workbench. His spectacles gleamed in the dim light, but his eyes, bright as candle flame, softened when they saw the watch in her hands. "It has fallen silent, hasn't it?" he said gently, before she could speak. Nora's throat tightened. She nodded. The old man set aside his tools and beckoned her closer. She laid the watch on the counter. Its silver casing looked dull, almost gray, as though even its shine had been smothered. "Why?" she whispered. "It was alive. It was laughing. It made everyone happy. Why has it stopped?" The clockmaker folded his hands, studying the watch with a sadness Nora did not understand. "You've done well, child," he said slowly. "The watch woke again because you carried it with care, because you listened when others would not. But you must remember, laughter is not endless if only remembered. Memories fade as shadows fade in the dark. The watch can drink from memory for a while, but it cannot live on echoes alone." Nora frowned, her small hands tightening around the edge of the counter. "Then what does it need?" The old man's gaze met hers, steady and kind. New laughter, fresh joy. Not only the remembering of what once was, but the making of what can be. That is the only way to keep it alive. Nora looked down at the silent watch. His words sank into her like stones into water. New laughter. She thought of the old woman on the bench, her memories of skipping games. That laughter had returned like a faded song replayed after years of silence. But no one had skipped rope since. The shepherd had laughed at his lamb's mischief, but now his face was gray again. The joy she had stirred had been fleeting, an echo of something old, not a spark to kindle something new. The watch had fed on what remained, but it had grown hungry again. "It needs us," Nora murmured. "It needs us to keep laughing, now not just remembering how we once did." The clockmaker nodded. "Laughter is a living thing. It must be tended like a flame. Memories are warm, but they cannot feed the fire forever." Nora touched the watch gently. She felt the weight of silence inside it, heavy as stone. For the first time since she had stepped into the crooked street, she wondered if she could truly keep such a gift alive. That evening, the village square felt colder than usual. Nora sat on the fountain's edge, the watch clutched tightly in her hand. She watched as the villagers went about their routines, closing shutters, stacking crates, calling children home. The air carried no laughter, no spark. She thought of the meadow in her dreams, of the golden-haired boy who had whispered, "Don't forget." Perhaps this was what he meant, not to forget that laughter was not only a memory, but a promise, something that must be made again and again. Her chest tightened. Could she do it? Could she awaken new joy in a world so heavy with silence? She pressed the watch against her lips and whispered, "I'll try." The next morning, she began. She skipped stones by the riverbank and laughed when they sank instead of danced. She shared silly riddles with the baker's children, riddles she made up on the spot, nonsense that made them laugh harder for its foolishness. She hummed little tunes while helping her mother, adding extra notes until they turned into playful songs. At first, the laughter was small, uncertain. People glanced at her strangely, but then the giggles grew. The baker's wife joined in with the riddles, adding her own. The children made up verses to Nora's tunes. Even her father chuckled when she dropped a bucket of water and declared it a new kind of bath. And slowly, softly, the watch began to stir again, not with the faint echoes of old laughter, but with a brighter sound, as though new gears were turning inside. Its silver casing glowed faintly once more, and when Nora opened it, the giggle inside was joined by a clearer, sharper laugh, as if the child within had found fresh breath. Nora's heart swelled. The old clockmaker had been right. New laughter was what the watch needed, laughter born today, not just remembered from yesterday. That night, she placed the watch on her table again. It ticked once, then fell silent, as though resting after a long day. But its silence no longer frightened her. She understood now. It was not a dead silence, but a waiting one, like a seed sleeping in the soil until morning. She lay down, the faint sound of her own laughter still echoing in her ears, and smiled as sleep took her. In her dream, the meadow returned. The golden-haired boy stood closer this time, his watch glowing brightly in his hands. "You've begun to learn," he said softly, his voice like wind through leaves. Nora nodded. "It needs new laughter." He smiled, radiant. "Yes, yours and theirs. Keep giving, keep listening. Only then will the watch truly live." Then he laughed, a sound so clear it rang like bells, and Nora laughed with him, their voices mingling as the dream dissolved into dawn. The Festival of Joy. The idea came to Nora like a flicker of sunlight through a shuttered window. For days, the watch had rested in her hands, quiet and patient, as though waiting for her to understand what it truly needed. She had carried it through the lanes of the village, feeling its weight not as a burden, but as a reminder of a promise. The people smiled less now, their laughter dimming once more. The watch's silver surface no longer gleamed as it once did. Instead, it seemed tired, as though longing to be filled again. Nora sat one morning at the edge of the fountain in the square, turning the watch gently in her palm. Children ran past, their games subdued, their shouts muffled. The baker trudged by with flour still dusted across his apron, but no spring in his step. Even the birds perched on the rooftops seemed to sing less brightly, as though the silence of the village had reached their small wings to dot. And then it struck her: the watch did not merely collect laughter, it thrived on it, grew strong with it, blossomed when joy was shared freely. Memories alone were not enough. They were echoes, beautiful but fading. What the watch longed for was not the faint remembrance of laughter, but the real thing, blooming new and bright in the present. That night, as she sat beside her window and listened to the faint rustle of wind, Nora whispered to herself, "Then we must give the watch what it longs for. We must give it joy, fresh and alive." The thought seemed impossible at first. How could one girl stir laughter into an entire village that had grown so used to its quiet ways? But then she remembered the old clockmaker's eyes, sparkling with secrets, and the stories he told of bells that once rang across the square during festivals. Once, long ago, the village had celebrated joy together. Once, music and stories had filled these cobbled streets. Perhaps, she thought, it could be so again. The next morning, Nora rose early. She brushed the sleep from her eyes, braided her hair neatly and slipped the silver watch into the pocket of her dress. The ticking had not yet returned, but she thought she felt a faint hummaz, though the watch listened, waiting. She went first to the baker. "Would you make sweet buns, the kind children love?" she asked him gently. He sighed. "Sweet buns take more sugar than I have to spare." But Nora smiled. "If we share what little we each have, perhaps we can make something greater than we imagine." Something in her voice, or perhaps the faint shimmer of the watch in her hand, softened his reluctance. He nodded. "Very well, child. If this is for joy, I will bake." She went then to the seamstress. "Would you hang ribbons and cloth across the square to make it bright again?" The seamstress hesitated, her fingers worn from mending clothes, day after day. But as Nora spoke, the watch glimmered faintly, and the woman remembered, for just a moment, how she had once braided ribbons into her daughter's hair. She smiled. "Yes, I will sew." From one door to another, Nora went, speaking softly, kindly, reminding the villagers of laughter they had once known. Not the watch's echoes this time, but her own words, her own warmth, coaxing them to remember the importance of gathering. Some shook their heads at first, doubtful that such a thing could be done, but one by one they agreed, because Nora's voice carried hope, and hope, like laughter, has a way of awakening what has been sleeping too long by the week's end. The village square stirred with life as it had not in years. The fountain was scrubbed clean until its waters sparkled in the sunlight. Banners of soft cloth stretched from window to window, catching the breeze like sails of a ship. The baker's oven glowed day and night as sweet buns, pies, and sugared twists filled baskets lined with linen. The seamstress stitched bright ribbons that fluttered from lampposts like falling petals. Children gathered, curious and excited, tugging at their mother's skirts, whispering about what was to come. Musicians dusted off fiddles and flutes, long left in attics. The blacksmith polished the old bell that once hung in the square, a bell whose chime had not been heard in many seasons. And in the center of it all stood Nora, the watch clasped against her heart. She felt its hum grow stronger with each passing day of preparation, as though it too sensed what was to come. It did not tick, not yet, but warmth spread from its silver surface into her palm. Steady and certain, the day arrived, bathed in golden light. The sky stretched clear, the air carrying the faint scent of bread, honey, and flowers. As evening fell, lanterns were lit, their glow spilling like stars into the cobbled streets. Nora stood upon the fountain's edge, holding the pocket watch aloft. "Let this be a night of joy," she called, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger. As the villagers turned their faces toward her, "Let us remember that laughter is not only a memory, it is here, waiting for us, if only we open our hearts." A cheer rose not loud at first, but growing, rolling like a wave. The musicians began to play, fiddles leaping, flutes trilling. Children clapped their hands and spun in circles, their laughter bubbling high into the air. The baker passed out sweet buns dusted with sugar, their warmth filling eager hands. The seamstress tied ribbons in the girl's hair, and even the weary workers loosened their shoulders, lifting mugs of cider with unexpected grins. The watch in Nora's hand glowed, at first faintly, like a candle flame, then brighter, pulsing, in time with the music, until its silver case gleamed like moonlight made solid. Nora felt it vibrate, heard it give the faintest of chimes, Not a tick, not a toll, but a bell-like note, as though laughter itself had been captured and set ringing dot as the night deepened. Stories were told around the fountain. The old woman, who once remembered childhood games, now stood before the crowd, her eyes shining as she recounted tales of her youth, of races across meadows, of secret forts in the woods, of songs sung beneath starlight. The children listened, wide-eyed, giggling when she mimed her clumsy younger self tripping over roots. The blacksmith, usually so stern, surprised everyone by balancing a hammer on his nose until it toppled, making the children squeal with delight. Even the baker, red-cheeked and flour-dusted, joined a game of tag, lumbering through the crowd with mock ferocity as children shrieked with laughter around him. Every burst of joy, every ripple of laughter seemed to feed the watch. It grew, warmer and brighter, its glow spreading like dawn across Nora's hand. She could feel the laughter threading into its heart, woven not as memories, but as living sound voices, ringing, bells chiming, feet stomping to music, hands clapping in rhythm. The village, once quiet and heavy, breathed freely again. For the first time in years, silence did not press upon its streets. Instead, laughter rolled through every corner, bouncing off walls, carried high by lantern light. When midnight came and the musicians let their final notes fade into the air, the villagers gathered one last time in the square. Nora opened her hand, showing them the watch. It no longer looked tired. It shone as though it had been newly forged, its silver gleaming with a soft inner fire. She pressed the clasp, and the watch opened. From inside spilled a chorus of faint echoes, not of fragile memories, but of the very laughter that had filled the night. Giggles, chuckles, roaring mirth, all of it wove together, a tapestry of sound that wrapped around the crowd like a warm cloak. The villagers gasped, then laughed again, as though hearing themselves reflected back, multiplied and magnified. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others held one another close. The old woman whispered, "It lives because we live, because we laugh." Nora nodded. The watch is not only a keeper of what is lost, it is a reminder of what we must continue to give. The villagers cheered, raising their mugs, their voices, their laughter once more. Long after the festival ended and lanterns were extinguished, the glow of joy lingered. People walked home, arm in arm, their steps lighter. Children fell asleep, still smiling, clutching ribbons or crumbs of sweet buns. The baker, seamstress, and blacksmith spoke of making the festival a tradition, something to be held every year so that laughter would never again fall into silence. Nora stood in the empty square, the watch warm against her chest. The fountain gurgled softly beside her, and the stars glittered overhead as though they too had joined in the night's laughter. She felt the watch's steady hum, full and alive, carrying the sound of the festival within it like a heartbeat. "Rest now," she whispered to it. "You are safe, you are full." And as she turned toward home, she thought she could hear it, not just ticking, not just chiming, but laughing softly, as though it too had been healed by the joy it carried. Keeper of laughter. The pocket watch no longer looked fragile, or tired. Its silver surface glowed softly, as if brushed with moonlight, its clasp warm against Nora's hand, its hum steady as a heartbeat. Within it lived the sound of life, echoes gathered from memories, and fresh voices from the festival that had filled the square with joy. Together they wove into something richer, something whole, a bridge between past and present. It was not just a vessel of what had been. It was alive now, carrying joy forward. Nora understood, at last, that she had become its keeper. The old clockmaker had given her more than an heirloom. He had entrusted her with a gift meant not to sit on a shelf, but to move through the world, to chime when silence grew too heavy, to remind people of what they carried within themselves. She was no longer just the girl who had stumbled across a peculiar silver watch. She was the one who had coaxed it back to life, the one who had returned laughter to the village. In the weeks that followed the festival, the village seemed transformed. It was not that sorrow vanished or hardship disappeared. There were still long days of work, seasons of worry, moments when quiet returned. But now there was something woven beneath it all, a steady thread of joy, ready to be found again. Children played more freely in the lanes. The baker whistled as he kneaded dough, dusting his counter with flour clouds. The seamstress hummed as she sewed, leaving ribbons fluttering in the breeze outside her door. And the old blacksmith, once so stern, laughed at himself more often when he made a clumsy mistake with his tools. Whenever the village began to feel heavy again, Nora would take the watch from her pocket. She would press the clasp, and a soft chorus of giggles would spill out, filling the air like sunlight breaking through a cloud. Sometimes the laughter was faint and tender, like a baby's first delighted gurgle. Other times it was bright, full, the kind of rolling mirth that made shoulders shake and tears stream down cheeks. And always the villagers would smile, reminded that joy was not gone, it was only waiting to be remembered. At first, Nora worried that the watch might one day grow silent again. She watched it carefully, listening for every chime, holding it to her ear at night as though it were a living creature whose heartbeat she had to guard. But the watch seemed content now, no longer flickering in and out of silence. She realized why. It no longer depended on her alone to fill it. The festival had taught the villagers how to create laughter anew, and every time joy bloomed, the watch seemed to catch it, weaving it into its store. It was no longer just a keeper of what had been. It had become part of the rhythm of life itself. One evening, Nora sat with the old woman who had once told stories of her childhood games. They shared tea beside the fountain, the lanterns flickering. In the cool dusk air, the woman leaned on her cane and said, "You've given us back something we forgot we had. But tell me, Nora, who will remind you?" Nora looked down at the watch in her lap, its silver glowing faintly in the lantern light. "Perhaps the watch itself will," she said softly. "It carries not only the laughter of others, but my own too. Every time I smile, every time I laugh, it listens." The woman nodded, her eyes gentle. "Then you will never be alone." As the days grew into months, Nora carried the watch everywhere she went. When the cobbler's shop fell quiet and his shoulders slumped with the weight of bills unpaid, she visited him and let the watch chime. The sound reminded him of the silly songs his father used to sing while repairing shoes, and he found himself chuckling again, lighter in spirit. When the children quarreled in the street, she brought the watch close, and soon they remembered the joy of playing together, their giggles replacing angry tears. Even the travelers who passed through the village seemed touched by it. Once, when a weary merchant stopped by the fountain and spoke of long journeys filled with silence, Nora held the watch in her palm. The laughter that spilled out startled him at first, but soon his eyes softened. "I had forgotten that sound," he said, his voice hushed. "It was my wife's laugh years ago. Thank you for reminding me." Each time Nora shared the watch's gift, she felt her own heart swell. She began to understand that joy was not a treasure to be locked away, but a living thing that grew only when given. The more it was shared, the more it multiplied, until it seemed the watch could hold endless laughter without ever overflowing. It was not a box to be filled and emptied. It was a bridge, a vessel through which joy could pass from one soul to another. The seasons turned. Autumn painted the trees in gold and scarlet, and the children leaped into piles of leaves, their laughter echoing across the square. Winter came, crisp and white, and the villagers built snow figures with scarves and hats, laughing as they tumbled into the drifts. In spring, the watch chimed among blossoms as the festival of joy was held again, brighter than before, a tradition reborn. Summer brought long evenings of music and dance, and the sound of laughter seemed to hum in the very stones of the village. Through it all, Nora remained the watch's keeper. She grew taller, her voice deepened with age, but she never stopped carrying the silver timepiece close to her heart. She did not think of it as a burden, for it did not weigh her down. Instead, it lifted her, reminding her that she was never far from joy as long as she chose to share it. One dusk, years after the first night she opened the watch, Nora walked slowly through the village streets. The sky glowed in shades of rose and lavender, the lamps beginning to flicker to life one by one. The air was filled with the faint smell of baking bread and the distant strains of a fiddle being tuned. Children's voices rang out in bursts of laughter as they played chase across the square, their shadows long against the cobbles. Nora placed her hand against her pocket, feeling the familiar warmth of the watch. It chimed softly, not loudly, enough for all to hear, but enough for her to know it was alive and well. It was not an ordinary chime, not a clock's mechanical tick, but a living sound like a bell struck gently, carrying joy in its resonance. She smiled to herself, knowing that the watch had become more than an object of wonder. It was a companion, a reminder, a promise that laughter would always find its way back, even when silence tried to settle in. She paused at the fountain where her journey had truly begun, where once she had sat with the watch cold and silent in her hands. Now the water sparkled in the fading light, and lanterns reflected in its ripples like tiny stars. She sat for a moment, listening to the evening around, Hertha, voices of neighbors, the faint bark of a dog, the music drifting from a nearby window. Life, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Nora knew the watch did not belong to her alone. Someday, when the time was right, she would place it in another's hands, just as the clockmaker had placed it in hers. Joy was meant to be carried forward, passed from one soul to another, across generations. But for now, it was hers to guard, hers to share, hers to cherish. The bells in the tower rang out the hour, their notes blending with the laughter of children still playing in the square. Nora rose, slipping her hands into her pockets, feeling the steady warmth of the silver watch. She walked on, her steps light, her heart steady. Behind her, the village hummed with life. Ahead of her, the path stretched into dusk. The watch chimed gently in her pocket, carrying laughter, old and new, memories and moments, echoes and fresh voices. And as Nora walked through the twilight, she felt certain that wherever she went, joy would follow, for she was the keeper of laughter. And so, dear dreamer, the pocket watch of forgotten laughter continues to glow, carrying joy wherever it goes. Nora keeps its magic safe, sharing it whenever the world feels too quiet. As you drift into sleep, may you too carry a pocket full of peace, laughter, and gentle dreams. Good night from Whispers of the Night.